It's really exciting for me to be here. Thank you for coming. I am excited because I don't think we've done in the IGDA community, you guys been here longer than I have, but a whole uh, event dedicated to the discipline, the craft, the art uh, of quality assurance, game testing.
Yeah, career panel. Yeah.
All right. My name is Robert Den Bryant, and this is a really special event for me because to commemorate the publication of the fourth edition of Game Testing All in One, which is the first book ever written on game testing. First came out in 2004. My co-author, Charles Schultz, and I kept updating it for 3 editions. Charles passed 2 years ago. And so the publisher approached me and said, hey, we still need a new edition. So we updated it with a cover image from our friends at World Walker Games here in Austin. And this is a screenshot from Wildermyth, right, which is a real Austin success story the last couple of years. And somebody else told me yesterday that Wildermyth Physical is on sale now. So you can buy Wildermyth. It's been downloadable on Steam forever. They did a console version that shipped in the fall, and now you can buy, for certain consoles, a physical product of Wildermyth. And how backwards is the world that that's become a thing, right? Anyway, but I, like many people who you talk to in the industry, I came from QA. I had a whole nother career and was at kind of a midpoint in my 20s. And I'm like, well, what I thought I'd be doing, I'm getting frustrated. I'm getting poor. I may have to move from Los Angeles, where I was living, back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I'm from. And I walked into a temp agency because I needed work. And they looked at my resume and they said, well, you have all this PowerPoint. Is that like multimedia? And I'm like, yeah, you can embed a video clip. You can embed a sound clip. They're like, oh, okay, we'll send you to Mattel. And you can test CD-ROM games for them. And I'm like, people get paid for that? Wow. So I started as a $9 an hour game tester for what was then Mattel Media, which was the interactive publishing arm of Mattel, the toy company. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven because I walked in and people had toys on their cubes, and we got to work with awesome Mattel brands like Hot Wheels and Barbie. And the very first product I ever worked on was, I'm not making this up, it was called My Interactive Pooh. Winnie the Pooh, the bear, okay? And it was a robotic Pooh doll that connected to your computer via the serial port, remember the serial port, and shipped at a $99 price point. And so it was a giant bomb that summer, but it worked well because we in QA, we in Mattel QA, we called ourselves the best test in the West. And like a lot of folks from QA, I saw an opportunity to learn the business from the ground up, to learn game development from the ground up, because I was not a programmer and I'm certainly not an artist. But so many of us, so many industry leaders came from QA, and it's an exciting place to be. And I'm happy to say that over the last 20 years, the role of game testing has been recognized as critical, as a discipline that deserves and is getting its own career path, other than just a place to start. And it was my joy, speaking of stuff that happened right before COVID, in 2019, I was asked to speak in Amsterdam at an international conference dedicated to game testing. It was Game Quality Global 19 or something. So the fact that we have worldwide conferences dedicated to QA, I think is amazing because that's how far the discipline has come. But today is not about grandpa telling war stories. It's about talking to folks who are testing games right now, who are deep into it. What's it like? What's going on? How did they get there? Where do they see things going? And so I want to introduce our panelists. First of all, from which company right now?
Retro Studios.
From Retro Studios, Luke Tran. From the big place on Bee Cave with the giant game that exhausts me. Huh?
CIG.
CID. There we go.
G.
CIG.
Cloud
Cloud Imperium Game. Enough with the acronyms. Cloud Imperium Games. My friend and former student Lily Perkins. And then finally, and this makes me happy because I haven't seen them in 2 years, maybe. That's your fault. Okay, don't come at me. One of they were a TA for me at St. Edward's, and they've been working in QA and project management ever since, and they're now at Supernatural. I love that show. All the seasons. Supernatural, you'll tell us about that. James Nix. So let's cheat the cheers a little bit. And we just kind of said where you're working, but tell us kind of what you're doing right now and how you got there. And let's start with James.
Right, so I work at Supernatural, which is owned by Oculus Studios, which is owned by Meta. And Supernatural is a fitness VR game. So basically think Beat Saber, but you're actually exercising while you play it. And I'm currently a QA engineer, which is a fancy term for basically senior embedded QA. So embedded QA means I work directly with the developers. I'm right on their team. I work right alongside like the artist, the designer, the engineer. Like they show me their earliest stuff. I test it, give feedback, like talk about like what potential risks are, that kind of thing. And before Supernatural, I was at Ubisoft, where I was contract embedded QA. And then my studio shut down, rest in peace. And before that, I was at Activision, where I started as entry-level functional QA, making $12 an hour.
Inflation. Okay. Thanks so much, Lily.
So at CIG, I am a used to be live QA specialist, but then they changed the acronym just last month to RQA, which I still don't know what that stands for. And basically what I do is I am like the in-between for the programmers and then the people we have actually just playing the game, who give us feedback and stuff like that. So I kind of help, like someone in our audience. And I'll be in the live environments testing to see how builds are holding up. If we've got newer builds coming out that we haven't published yet, I get to dig into there and try to break them, or they're almost always already broken when we go in, so I get to just kind of say, hey, not this one, fellas. And our QA specialist is kind of just fancy, like QA senior, like just a little bit under QA senior. And yeah, before I did that, I worked as a QA helper, kind of, with Glitchworks. And that was where I really got the most experience and qualifications to be able to apply to become QA, was how I got to get the actual training for how to do it and stuff like that.
Awesome.
So that was cool.
Okay. Whoop.
I'm gonna go the other way. I think I started in 2019. I started as like base level contract QA at a studio called Nerve Studios, and I did the Doom 1, Doom 2 remasters alongside with id, and I had unofficially like 3 days worth of Doom internal testing. But I was at Nerve for a year. And
Was that here?
No, I'm actually from the Dallas area.
Okay.
So Nerve Studios is in Dallas. I was there for a year, and this little thing called COVID happened, and so the studio shut down. And I picked up a QA job in the mobile industry, another Dallas-based studio, People Fun. I was there for 2 years, and then I actually moved down here to work at a studio called Airship Syndicate, which is an indie studio. I was there for a year and some change as like a senior level QA, and unfortunately they were going through a bunch of layoffs. I was part of the first round of layoffs, and that was in January of last year, and then March of last year. Since then, I've been at Retro, working on Metroid Prime 4.
Are you allowed to tell us you're
I am.
on Metro Prime?
Nintendo is not listening right now.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's awesome. So
Let's talk about let's begin by talking about the 500 pound elephant in the room, which is a really skinny elephant if you think about it. And that is it's been, I'm looking at, three very young people. You've already been laid off, or you've had to go through a studio closure. That's tough. How did that feel?
Bad. Yeah, for me at Ubisoft, we were working on a first-person arena shooter called X Defiant. And the idea was we would kind of not like compete with Call of Duty because we weren't expecting to be as big as Call of Duty, but be able to carve out a niche, right? Stealing some Call of Duty fans. And yeah, we were all very excited about the project, loved working on it. We enjoyed working with each other. We had all this really, really cool stuff planned for like later seasons. Like, oh man, like season 4, we're gonna let you play as like Assassin's Creed characters. Like, it's gonna be so cool. And then we had to keep delaying the game. And it was kind of like this creeping sense of dread. Nobody really, elephant in the room. Nobody wanted to talk about it, but we all kind of knew that the chance of failure was getting higher and higher. And, so you start looking for other opportunities, like, okay, making a plan. What am I going to do? And then, yeah, the day comes when they say, hey, we're shutting down the game after one season. And it still doesn't feel good, even if you prepared for it.
Sure.
So at least when I got laid off at Nerve because of COVID, that was very, different kind of outlook because the entire studio shut down and it was all everybody's looking out for each other. Good luck. When it's just like a QA layoff, like what happened at Airship, where a couple of my QA coworkers got laid off in addition to just several other different departments, you're going to have a lot of mood whiplash because throughout game development, when you're working with engineers or producers, at least from my experience, you're always going to be told QA is really valuable, and you guys are doing a really awesome job. Keep up the good work. We couldn't do this without you. The sentiment, though, I think prevailing through anybody who's worked in QA, you're first on the chopping block, and so there's a degree of getting into QA. You kind of know, kind of take every day as it's your last because you just don't know what could be happening, and it's very much enjoying your time, but it's a double think of enjoying your time as QA, but also just knowing you're first to go. So it's hard.
I remember when we were going through layoffs, it was really unfortunate because they were targeting like the higher salaries, which tended to be the people with the most experience and ability,
Right.
and because that's who was costing them the most.
Right.
And so it was like there's always this fear of when you get laid off of the feeling of like feeling like you're a failure, feeling like, oh, it's because I wasn't doing my job good enough, or I messed up somehow. But really, it's just a money game for the most part, and it has nothing to do with like your ability or your skill level at all. And it sucked. A lot of the people I work with have been in the industry for a very, very long time and have like families and children. Like one of my friends who got laid off, he had just had a baby, and it was like that kind of, and it was right before the holidays too. So it was like all kinds of stress. And
Right.
it's never a case of like, the company's got to look out for you kind of like sometimes they do. Some of the like smaller ones will give you a really good heads up and give you a long period of time to find a new job. But some of them, they just will kind of like throw it at you, and you just have to be ready to just kind of like have backups or have people you can rely on and stuff. And so it's really, really tough.
It's tough. I mean, it's always tough. It's always tough. But, part of there's been a cultural sort of problem with QA in the sense that back in the day when most games had an annual production cycle, most big publishers would staff up in the spring so they could crunch during the summer. The games would ship in the third quarter to be on shelf at Christmas. And once you shipped your game, you were pretty much out of a job generally. And they would do a big force reduction and keep just a handful of the best and brightest, and those would become the test leads for the next year. It was like that at Activision in Santa Monica. It was like that at Mattel the first couple of years I was there. And I was very, very, it was traumatic to say goodbye to so many friends that you worked, elbow to tushy with for months. But hey, congratulations. You did your job so well. The game shipped. Bye-bye. And maybe we'll get you back next year. And then, so it can be, it's always been traumatic. It's always tough. I was about to say it's tough letting people go, but it's worse getting let go. I've been in both positions. But would you say that at least the seasonality of every year there's a staff reduction, has that sort of like gone away? Because games take so long to develop.
In the AAA space, and even now we're talking about quadruple A space,
Right.
when you have pre-production lasting like 2 or 3 years, you're not going to have that yearly cycle anymore. And especially with the advent of live service games, you're going to have a lot of teams and studios kind of just ebb and flow, like not like how it was back then, where it was a hard cutoff at, it's holidays, we're done, X. What I've seen and when I've talked to other people, it's very what feels sporadic, because you can have pre-production go on. Oh, we're going into production, but we don't need your specific role anymore. We're downsizing. We're looking for a new team. We're outsourcing a team. So I would say the industry is a little spookier in that regard, where you might not know exactly when the axe is coming,
Right.
from my experience.
Let's change gears though. What do you like about testing?
It's like solving puzzles.
Yeah?
Yes, it feels like I'm solving puzzles. And especially when I worked on Call of Duty and X Defiant, it was like I was solving puzzles with my friends. Like all together in call, we were trying to figure out like what just happened, why did that happen, like how can we get it to happen again? And like that sense of accomplishment when you finally figure out like how to trigger that one like crash or whatever is very rewarding and satisfying. And also like, I don't know, getting to work directly with developers, sometimes developers you looked up to, like, Call of Duty, for example. Call of Duty Zombies is kind of the only part of Call of Duty that I really like, and I really like the music, okay? And one time I found an audio bug, And the composer of said music fixed that bug, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, you know, like so. There's a little bit of like fanboying in there, like getting to work with like these great developers, that kind of thing. But mostly, it's the solving puzzles for me. You know?
I really like the feeling of like breaking something, and it's really cool when there's like you hit an invisible wall, and then there's always the like, ooh, can I go into the map this way kind of a thing, and it's really like definitely rewarding and satisfying getting to find like a really really bad nasty bug that makes everyone stop and have to shift around to like try to identify all the like workarounds and the different ways it can be reproduced and stuff. And with the game I work on, because it's already out in like alpha for people to play, I get a lot of like, I see the live chats of people being like, oh, this thing's breaking, this thing's not working. And I get to be like, ooh, and go in and like test it out and see exactly what is going wrong. And that is fine for a sense of like purpose too, because it's like, oh, these people are having this thing go wrong. I can go in, I can identify it, film it, and then get that out directly to the programmers so that the stuff gets fixed really fast.
Mm-hmm.
I think something that hasn't been said yet that I think is really impactful about QA is QA 99% of the time, they're the department that just knows the game the best. They know the game better than designers because they're actually playing the game. They know how the game's running, unlike engineers. So you're working with all these other departments, and I've been very fortunate in that all the studios I've worked at, I've been able to like leave my mark on the game. So in Doom 1 and Doom 2, I got to make all the achievements for the games. In Wayfinder for Airship Syndicate, one of the characters, I was talking to the designer, like, hey, Senya plays really bad because X, Y, Z. And then we had that conversation. So I got to push my ideas. Like, I think Senya should do these things because as a player, I want this. And then in Retro, I've been very fortunate. I'm getting to voice certain characters. So it's just a level of, you're working with everybody and it's not just your team. And that's very rewarding.
What do you mean voice certain characters?
So there are a lot of NPCs in the game, and they threw me in a recording booth.
Oh,
like,
that's
hey,
awesome.
say these lines like 14 times. And
That's-
just, yeah.
That's awesome.
And so that's just my relationship working with the audio team a lot. They just, oh, you just recognize when audio bugs occur. Just bring them in anyway, just for funsies. And, like no other department, like engineer is never going to work with audio bugs, or the tech art team is never going to work on audio bugs. And so just because they recognize QA as they know the game, you can leverage that in a lot of different ways.
That's awesome. So the flip side of that question is, what's the most frustrating thing? And we've already taken layoffs off the table. Okay. What's the most, just day to day, what's the most frustrating thing you find about your job right now?
There's this stereotype for QA that we are like not as important or like lesser on the totem pole, and that leads to a lot of being like not disrespected, but just kind of not really listened to. Yeah, whenever like I've had a lot of issues in the department where me and like my other coworkers will have a thing where we'll report a bug and say like, this is a really nasty one, it's causing all these issues, and someone from another department will kind of just close it as couldn't reproduce because they just tried it once and it was like a really low repro bug, and so we're constantly going back in and be like, no, this is still happening, it's still a thing, don't just close it because you just like want to. And so it's a lot of like not really being listened to for a lot of our stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say too. Like also is not being listened to, or people just don't even bother to know what your job is. Like we have an outsourced QA team, Keywords, that we use for like the bulk of our functional testing because they're a much bigger team than our like small embedded team, and people will like confuse me with them even though our jobs are completely different and they're not even like members of our company. and like I'll talk to someone and introduce myself and be like, oh yeah, I'm the new hire, and they'll be like, yeah, you guys like come and go so often, right? I'm like, well, there's only 5 of us and most of them have been here for 4 years, so I don't think so. But yeah, people just viewing you as expendable, or like you find something that like you're like, hey, this is gonna have a huge impact on our players, they're gonna like hate us for this, we have to fix this, and then you fight, and then they still decide to not fix it or whatever. And then when players hate it, like you can be like, yeah, I told you so, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good still. Like it should have just been fixed. Yeah, people just not listening, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, on a day-to-day basis, like you could have the most badass QA team. You guys could be working your ass off. You're never gonna find every single bug. And that one bug that you like, I know this bug happens. I've seen it once, but it's never gonna happen to me again for whatever reason. 80,000 players are gonna play the game. You're gonna have like 4,000 people find the bug.
Right.
And production team or leadership teams like, why didn't we log that? Why didn't we? Like, why isn't this called that? We did. There's only 6 of us. Like, there's a lot of pressure on you to be perfect, and you're never going to be perfect. There just is no way you can catch every single bug, and that's a really hard thing to like wrap your head around starting out. It's just like, it's okay. Like, you just do your due diligence, and that's the best you can do.
It's funny because I haven't actually done QA in years, but I feel you, right? I always felt like the strongest tool I had was the bug base, right? The bug report. And it's frustrating because when you have 100% reproducible bug, and when it's very unambiguous that if X leads to Y, you get a unambiguously bad result, those tend to get fixed. It's the low repro things. It's the stuff that you wish you had a sniffer in the code that helped you kind of figure out what of the millions of conditions that are happening in this very, very complex game, what combination is it that's creating this result? That gets very, very, very frustrating. And I will tell you, and you've probably seen this, and it probably happens with every new update with your game. You're feeling pretty good. You go live, right? This happened with a friend of mine who's working on what used to be called FIFA and is now what?
FC.
EA Sports FC. It's like, and they have hundreds of testers around the world just kicking, see what I did there? That's a pun, kicking the game around for months. And then it goes live and you're like expecting it to explode, because even though you have hundreds of testers, probably north of 1,000 testers over the life of the product, the minute it goes live, you've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of testers worldwide. And they're going to amplify, and this is part, to me, the joy of testing is that, breaking stuff, I get to think in ways that the designer didn't anticipate, right? And I colored outside the lines, and look at the mess I made. Well, when you have millions of players worldwide, they're going to do that. You can never get ahead of the player. And so it does get very frustrating. It's very scary. So with your game, Lily, it's not shipped yet, I've heard. That's another pun. Ship. There's spaceships in her game. And yet you've been able to play it for years and years and years. And every time you push an update, you're pushing an update to, essentially free, not even free beta testers. They're testers who are paying you to play the game.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good racket. But also, what I heard you say is you're monitoring the chat. you're listening to the players play the game while they're playing the game.
Mhm.
How much do you capture from that? That's brilliant. And is it more qualitative, or can you actually find bugs from that?
You can actually find bugs. Something we're trying to change is how much we're allowed to talk to players while they're in game and then while we're in office. Because outside of office hours, if someone like messages me or I go to an event where there's players, I can talk with them easily.
Sure.
But while we're clocked in, we're not really allowed to engage in chat unless we can back up ourselves in a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for like, it's not for anything bad. It's just kind of safety reasons because sometimes players can
Sure.
launch into
Yeah.
And so it depends because sometimes a lot of the bugs that are reoccurring with each new build that players will find by the thousands, it's already in our backlog or it's already getting worked on, so there's not really much I can do with that. But there are some cases where there will be a really wonky, weird bug, something where it's like our normal playthroughs that we do as testers, we wouldn't really touch on, or it's in like a weird area that we wouldn't normally have gone to because we're worried about like the key spawning locations primarily. And I'd say it's more. Maybe about twice a month we'll get a really good like report from someone being like, hey, devs who are listening, we have something going on with this space, like can we check it out? And then I'm allowed to go in and kind of be like, oh, can you specify, like when you say the caterpillar's not working, is it all the variants or just like a few? Because that's something of specifications with my job and being in the game so much is players will say, oh, this specific ship isn't working because the lights aren't they're like flickering weird or something, and then I can go in and say, okay, have you tried all the variations of the ship? Did you do anything different to it? Did you land somewhere weird? Because I can think of all the other things that could be causing it instead of just a general like, hey, this isn't working. I can go in and find the specifications as to why exactly it isn't, which is like really helpful in terms of just the mass amount of how big this game is and being able to find the little specifics that players call out that then I can take and then run with.
Right. Okay. Let me ask in the book we've always sort of divided game testing into like two approaches. One is structured testing where you're following a check sheet because you have to follow a check sheet, right? And then there's sort of ad hoc testing where you're just kind of like, here, break the game, right? Do you see both those approaches being followed? Do our test plans and check sheets written and executed on anymore? Or is it kind of all just kind of, let's play until we find something? Or
For me, it's definitely very structured. And generally, ad hoc is something you only do when you have spare time or when you're brand new and just trying to learn the ropes. So like, for example, on X Defiant, one of our responsibilities was the smoke test. So every morning, we'd all hop in a game together, all hop in call together, and we had this big list of things we had to check on that day's build. So it'd be like, okay, like everybody like claim like, oh, like John, you're gonna test like this like assault rifle. Okay, I'll test this character. Like let's test like this ability, and let's like here's the maps we need to check because we checked these maps yesterday, so we should check these maps today, and like cycle through our like 20 maps that way. And so this is like a very like structured process, like a checklist of like, okay, test this. Oh my God, something weird happened. Everybody pause and figure out what just happened. If somebody write that up, continuing on. And so like ad hoc does kind of happen just via like having like a bunch of people like doing a structured list together, like weird things will happen. And like you can kind of be like, hey, I tested this gun the way I always test it. Let me like try to do something weird with it for once. But in general, like it's very much like, okay, here's the specific things we have to check. And then it's like in my current job, it's like, okay, I know these are the things that the engineers are currently working on. This is going to be like in our build soon. So I need to come up with a plan for like, how am I going to test this feature? Like, what are the edge cases I can think of? And like, I need to work with our release QA to like come up with how like keywords, our big functional team is going to test it. Like once it goes to them on like a larger scale. So generally very structured, but I would say differences in QA jobs can be like how much of that structure is given to you and how much of it is up to you to create.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely that. At my company too, when I first started, I was in Dev QA, and we were married to a checklist. Like we were not allowed to go off of it. It was like you'd have 1 to 12 of things, and then each one had like A, B, C, D, and each A, B, C, D had like Roman numerals with it. So it was a super thorough checklist. And then I switched to live QA, and it was a lot more ad hoc. But by then, I had been given more access to like Jira and stuff, and I ended up having just so many backlog issues that
And
it's like
Jira is where you keep the bug database.
yes.
Okay.
And I'd go through and have like top 5 bugs that I go through and check. So it's kind of an ad hoc, but it's more of like, it's kind of a checklist structure that I put on myself because I was wanting those things to get checked pretty regularly. But we do kind of like ad hoc here and there. Some days if the build is like super, super late, we'll be given an ad hoc day where it's like you can just go and like test some crazy stuff out, or if we're implementing a new planetary system, we'll get to go in and just test the planets and stuff, which is fun.
Yeah, the smoke test is which is the really regimented checklist. That's, from my experience, that's pretty industry standard nowadays. It's how not just the QA team has a pulse on the game, but usually if the QA team completes a smoke test, someone will report like, hey, smoke test is clear, or it's good, we have these issues. It's a way for everybody in the studio to have, at a very high level, like these are things that are broken versus not. And that's, I mean, it's a daily thing for every studio I've worked at. And depending on the size of the game, you're looking at 1 to 2 hours, or maybe just the morning. So you're doing a smoke test until lunch. And what I've seen a lot more of is QA teams internally making their own test sheets. So for like a live service game, for example, let's say a new ship comes out for, I'll just use the game for example, Star Citizen. If a new ship comes out, then someone will just have a checklist of basically anything you could do with this ship. Does it fly? Does it have correct collision? Does it have bad collision? Do the weapons work? Do the weapons don't work in specific ways? There's a lot of specific test plans that go on after, and ad hoc is usually like what they've said as well, just kind of the afterthought, because you're going to have more useful bugs and work done if you're following a structured plan, whether that be just for one specific thing or if it's a live action or a live service game update, which is like, oh, we have a new zone, all these new quests, new weapons, new monsters. That's going to have a plan for that as well. So smoke tests, test plans, and then ad hoc is kind of like the rhythm of modern QA from my experience.
Awesome. How, I'm trying to get away from saying how important is testing, but a question that I'm frequently asked is that, well, why do you need people testing games? Why can't you just
adversarial networks?
I know. Why can't you just write scripts? And one of the things that I'm seeing now that I wasn't seeing 20 years ago is that in some studios you are having testers writing scripts like using bots and stuff in interesting ways overnight to kind of extend the testing but not replace the testing. But why is it that we need people testing? Why can't the programmers just write programs to test the programs?
So this is something I was actually thinking about recently because I'm unfortunately at Meta, and Meta is really, really, really pushing AI a lot. So somebody asked me like, "Oh, do you think that's gonna like impact your job at all, like as QA, with all the like push for like AI and like everything?" And I'm like, honestly, no, I don't think so. I think if anything, we'll see automation testing, which is what you're talking about with having like bots and scripts and that kind of thing. I think if anything, we'll see that become a bigger QA discipline. It's already here and there in some studios, but because at the end of the day, like QA is there to break the code and think about the code in ways that the code itself cannot, and you can't do that by writing more code. Now, granted, automation testing does have like very useful like use cases. Like for example, okay, we have like 50 different map combinations and they're completely random, but we need to test them all on this build. Okay, you can have a robot that like loads into the game over and over and over and over, and then it can register like, oh, I got this combination, like check this box, like that kind of thing. That would take a real person like 100 hours of extremely tedious work. That's a great use case for automation testing. Or like, okay, like a boot check, which is when you literally just load into a map and make sure it doesn't crash. Like bots are great for that. Or like, okay, this is like when I worked on Warzone. Lobbies are like 120 people in Warzone. So it's like, okay, let's put in like 100 bots. We don't have to have 120 people together. Like that kind of thing. I think that is like the place of like automation. But I think attempts to try to have automation cover all of QA, I think you would see pretty quickly it would fail spectacularly because bots just can't think in the ways humans do.
I think the biggest thing, it was stressed to me when I started in QA, and it's something I stress when I worked with other QA teams, is QA, like the QA department is probably the only department that actually thinks like a player. The designer is going to think like a designer. If the designer knows in theory on paper how everything works, but designers aren't going to think about, what if you backtrack through routes and then go back again? What if you only crab walk sideways? Like, designers don't think like that. Engineers don't play the game. They know how it works, but like it's always QA just knows the game best. They know how a player thinks. It's the triplicate of they know how a dev thinks, they know how a player thinks, and they know how an idiot thinks. And you can't, like an engineer's never going to figure out like, because an engineer thinks super logically, they're really intelligent, and they make things work. And then it's like, hey, all this stuff is great, but I actually opened the pause menu 14 times and it crashes. And they're like, why did you do that? Because, like,
Because it's there.
yeah, like, QA is just, they're just infinitely smarter than any, because the amount of code you would have to make for every contingency would take 6 months. Whereas you could give a QA person like 6 hours and they'll find things broken. So it's just the computing power of a human brain is just not, you're never going to catch that in like a bot now at least.
I definitely like think like what you were saying, James. The bot could help like filter through stuff and go through like a fine-tooth comb, but then it still have to be QA going through the leftovers and stuff like that, and being able to kind of really emphasize the different types of players testing it.
We tell a story in the book about a racing game, and a new build came in, and they handed the build to a different team because in this studio, I think it was Microprose, they like to shake up, put different testers on different games. And they handed the build, and they walked down the hall, and they came back 3 minutes later saying, "We crashed it." "How could you crash it already? We're about to ship next week." He says, "Well, the first game in the first track in the game is a day map. It's a day track, and we turn on the lights in the car. Right?
Good.
Turn on the
Headlights.
headlights, and you know."
Why would you
Whoever
do
it
that?
was, the designer or the programmer, why would you do that? Because it's there, right? And so they had to, fortunately it was a pretty easy fix. But yeah. I want to open up
the conversation and ask our group, our audience, for questions. I saw a hand right there.
Yeah, guys, we heard a lot about what to expect while you're while you're there, while you're in the position of QA. As a general question to try to help students, what are some things that worked for y'all, like getting out of school? What are some things that you might want to that kids might want to have like on their resume while they're trying to get their name and face in front of people to try to get their foot in the door? What are some like general skills? Is there a Jira workshop you should take? Is there any certificates you want to try to add while you're working on your degree? Literally anything that comes to mind.
So I got started because there was a person I knew at a different studio whose wife was hiring at Nerve. And so the whole reason I got a job is just because of networking, which I know sucks. I hate networking myself, and it's awful, but that is, I think, something you can't deny. It's just knowing people, like not even like just checking with people, just having a network of people amongst all, like, don't want to focus on just AAA, just indie. Like having a network of game devs across all disciplines, across all types of game dev is really helpful. And beyond that, I think what really jump-started my jump from like associate or contract QA to senior QA is just having a very technical mindset. And whether that be literally like, I'm really good at tech writing, so my bugs, perfect, immaculate. Or having a technical mind of, I see how this works, I now understand how to breed it. Like they said, about being really interested about how game dev is like a puzzle, how QA is like a puzzle. Having a really inquisitive mind and being vocal about that. Like, don't be afraid to, in Slack, just like, hey, I have a question. Always getting your name out there just so people associate you with the point of contact is really helpful.
You got to network to get work.
Well, I never networked because I hate networking.
Well, you hate everybody.
For me, it was literally just that Activision was hiring dozens and dozens of people nonstop.
They're just creating a studio here.
They
in
were
Austin.
hiring basic, like super entry level, and I feel like that was just very lucky because for the 3-year period, they were hiring pretty much anybody who didn't just bomb the interview, and they don't do that anymore. So I'd say that a lot of it is just going to be persistence. Like, go on like Grapple HQ, have like your notifications set, be checking it daily, like find like these places where you can find jobs and like be checking them daily. Even if you already have a job, I would say just always keep your eyes open because you never know what like lucky opportunity is going to pop out. Like, oh my God, there's actually an entry level position. Like, you have to already have like your resume and cover letter like ready to go because these jobs go quickly. But in general, if you're still a student, I would say having a general sense of how all parts of game development work together is going to make you a really, really good QA tester. Like, if you're very specialized in one thing, then you can kind of fall into what we were talking about with like, well, an engineer thinks like an engineer. They focus on like what they're building, not on like the bigger picture. But I think being able to convey, like understanding how game development works as a whole, all the little parts together, and being able to communicate that. Communication is a very important skill in QA.
John, you got to have it.
Luke touched on this. I want to underline it a bit. And I have a question to follow up with. But production asked the question after the fact, why didn't QA flag this bug that we came out after a ship? But production knows QA finds the bugs, QA can advocate for fixing the bugs, QA does not fix the bugs. What if you did? I know that's not your job, but obviously out in the world and people playing games, they'll blame QA for not finding it. Well, yeah, they could have found it, but maybe they just didn't get fixed, and that's someone else's job. What if it was your job? Does that ever cause you frustration? Do you ever think about that? Or do you just say, I'm QA, that's not my job?
I actually, one of my coworkers, he's been in the QA industry for like 12 years, and he is also a programmer. And something that is super, super beneficial is he's able to look through crashes and be able to identify exactly what it was that triggered certain bugs because he knows the programming language and how to sort through it. And it makes our job way easier. And I wish, like, I want to kind of learn some programming languages so I can do the same thing. And it super speeds up the bug identification because even though he's not able to fix the bug itself, he can find in the code exactly what was going wrong because he doesn't have access to their actual program languages and stuff that they're like I don't know the where they
Look
put
at
the
the
codes.
dump.
Yeah, exactly. And he can identify it and then send it out, and so then the programmers can go in and be like, "Oh, awesome!" and then just quickly fix it. And so it definitely would be nice that way to then be able to be like, "Hey, I know what's going wrong, and I also know why it's going wrong and how it's going wrong within the code itself." And if we could add, I don't know about us also fixing it ourselves because that would mean that we'd have to stop all testing, switch over to a whole other program, and it would add a lot of time and delay the testing of the game as a whole if we had to do both stuff. But being able to at least have the coding knowledge to identify exactly what's going on would probably help speed up the process in certain smaller ways.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is kind of how you, what you're describing, I mean, is how you end up on the path to like specializing and also possibly moving to other branches. And I think typically it's something that only comes when you've been with a team for a while and they trust you. Like I worked on monetization when I was at Ubisoft, and after a while, I became familiar enough with like our tools for setting up the store and the items in it. And the producer knew me well enough that one day I found a bug that was like, oh, like the store item is broken. And I could see like, oh, I know exactly what field in the tool is making it broken. I was like, hey, Eli, can I just like edit this field? And he said, sure, go for it. And I fixed the bug myself. But that only happened because he trusted me. I like expressed my confidence, that kind of thing. So it's not something that you're going to start out doing in QA, but it's definitely possible.
What, John, was that the question though?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question. Can I call on myself?
Sure.
How important is writing
Very,
to your job?
very, very,
Very important. If you can't write good bugs, people aren't going to take you seriously. And by good bugs, I mean both like, oh, like spell it correctly, have good grammar, but also like you need to be able to describe very complex things sometimes in a way that like makes sense to people reading it.
It makes it succinct too. Like the amount of times I've seen bugs just get ignored because of a huge wall of text. You know, it's specific.
TLDR is the
Devs
thing.
love
Yeah.
to only read the first
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah.
The description and like they won't read any info in the ticket
Mhm.
unless it's like 5 words. The big thing is I've always proof your writing, which means making it succinct and making it just super simple where if you gave your ticket to a 5-year-old, they can understand it. To the level of when I started writing my tickets, it was turn on the game, like start the game, because that's how you start. And beyond that, with all the studios I've worked at, I'm sure it's with yours too, like other QA members will read your tickets, and so you're gonna know very quickly if like, hey, like what the fuck are you saying? Like, what do you want? And it's like, oh, you need to do this, 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 and you can't say it that way. It's really important to have well-written tickets. So, but it's really important.
There was this one ticket where I was trying to repro this really low repro bug, and it said, go to the spaceport, call your ship, get in your ship, and then call ATC to open the hangar doors, and then leave our Armistice zone. And I was like, okay, that's great and all, but did you use spacebar or Alt-N to get your ship ready and to raise the landing gear? Yeah, I was like, did you use right Alt-R to get the ship fully ready, or just use U and I to get it ready? When you left our Armistice zone, did you already switch to like quantum travel, or by schooling B, or did you just stay in?
This game sounds
SCM.
exhausting. Exhausting to me.
10 years in Alpha, Bob.
And it was like, because there's so many little itty bitty steps you have to do beforehand with controls that it's like anything from there could have triggered the ship suddenly dying once it left Armis system. Like there's so much that could have happened beforehand, and so it's like being very specific with raise landing gear, right alt N, and stuff like that is like huge.
Let me ask you another question I thought of. Sorry. And then I'll hand it back to you. Sorry. We kind of talked about how important is automating. We had a saying at Crave: if you're not taping, you're not testing. Meaning, because we did a lot of action sports games, and the things are happening. It's kind of like a fighting game. Things are happening really fast, and you, the tester, may not be aware of all the inputs you're doing because you're just in the middle of a 30 trick combo to try to trigger this one achievement or whatever. And we would fall back on we've had VHS recorders between the console and the TV. And so we could roll back and look at what something was. And it was helpful for writing bug. But now everything's digital. And everybody streams, and consoles are their own DVR. How often is it a good idea? Is it a crutch to put attach a clip of the bug to the ticket? How often does that happen?
You can tell that.
It's not
Always,
a
every
complete
time.
bug. If you
Oh, really?
if you
Okay.
don't do it, then your lead will come back and be like, "Hey, why did?
Where's the footage? You'll get yelled at by
Yeah,
Really?
you will get in trouble if you don't have media on your bug.
Wow.
Yes, and
If the engineer isn't reading the ticket, they're just clicking on.
that's the thing
Screenshot
is
or-
a lot of devs, to save time, they just look at the media. They
I
don't
see.
even read the bug all the way sometimes. And just in general, I mean, it's harder now working on VR because the recording tools aren't great. But at my previous jobs, it was like you should always be recording, period, when you're testing, even if like nothing's happening. Like just always be recording because you never know when something crazy is going to happen, and maybe you can't reproduce it, but you can prove that it happened, or try to like investigate, retrace your steps, like by having that video. And if you're not already recording, you're going to miss that crazy thing when it happens.
Anyone else? Yeah.
That'll blind me a little bit. What in your career, what's the most entertaining? In your careers, what's the most entertaining bug you found? Not the most big, not the biggest, the most entertaining.
I love this question.
I get really sad sometimes because I had so many funny bugs recorded from when I worked on Call of Duty, and I couldn't take any of them with me when I quit. But some highlights would be like swimming through the air, driving a car through the air. But we had one character skin who would like, for some reason, it would make like the getting hurt voice line trigger nonstop when you put on that skin. There was another one. This was on it was on Ground War from Modern Warfare 2, so that's like 24-person team versus 24-person team or something like that. And it was like when the match started, every character would repeat the same voice line at the same time, so it was like really, really fucking loud, and we had to play test over and over and over like that. Yeah, there's too many to list. There's a lot of hilarious bugs.
We have this one bug right now that's really fun where if you like equip a gun on your hip and then a gun on your back and then do some stuff with the menu going in and out and stuff like that, you can make it so that the next time you load in, the gun is through you and you can still kind of like use it. And there was one we had where we were introducing tanks for the first time in the game, and something was happening where the gravity was really, really low, but then they had programmed it so that you weren't supposed to be able to like topple over because then you get stuck. It was like you had to be able to keep rolling. And at one point, I fell down this hill, but it wouldn't let me fully go down the hill. So my tank went all the way up on like its tippy toes and then just kind of like walked down the hill into the tank. That was really fun. I recorded that, I have to say.
I think my favorite, in my previous project, Wayfinder, there was a sword and shield ability where your character will slam the shield down, and I think 6 bone spikes come out, and the spikes are all the same material except for the very tips, which had like some occlusion material. But if you were near a light source, it would capture the light on the occlusion and multiply it 6 times.
Good.
So you would just flashbang like literally the entire zone. Right? And so that was because it was just like a smoke test. I was like, oh, I'm just using my weapon ability, and then the person who was testing was just sort of screaming because I didn't see it, and Cindy did. And so you're just just a huge flashbang.
The worst, can I answer?
Sure.
This isn't the funniest, but it was the worst situation to be in. At Mattel, we were doing, we did some stuff with Sesame Workshop, right, which was the Sesame Street group. And they were challenging because they were the licensor, but they were also the developer. And so we would write bugs that we would want them, the developer, to fix. And they would put on their licensor hat and say, well, no, that's fine because it's the way Sesame Street works. So we were in this very awkward position. And like a lot of little kid software at the time, there was a lot of play through the game and unlock a coloring page, right? And the idea is that you would have mom or dad print that out and then you could scribble it, right? So it's the world's most expensive coloring book. And one of them was an acorn. And you did something with Elmo and he gave you a coloring page, said, look at your acorn or whatever. Well, the acorn didn't look like an acorn. The acorn, and we had 60 people in the lab at this time. You show them the picture of the acorn, they say, that's that big. That is male anatomy right there. And so we had to write this bug that said, the acorn looks like a penis. And the developer / licensor was like, no, it doesn't. So what do you do, right? And I had to offline it from the bug base and take the conversation email because I think it was lead tester on this thing. And I'm like, come on, let's get real. This looks like a... And they're like, and they got really pissy with me. They were like, well, all these assets are developed by talented Henson artists. Like she invokes Jim Henson's name, right? Which give us a license to publish a penis in this children's software. And so, and the panel probably has stories where you have to kind of pick the right hill to die on. I did not want to die on the penis hill.
They're going to learn somehow.
Huh? They're going to learn somehow, right? And so, and because they were the licensor, at the end of the day, they had approval for everything. So it went in as is. And you worry about this stuff because as QA, you get paid to worry, right? But I don't think we ever got a report on the of software being returned to the store or on the customer service line with a traumatized parent saying, you put up this in the thing.
Is for. Well, related to that, when you're working at Mattel and Crave, you correct me if I'm wrong, that you're working with a lot of third-party developers, period.
Yes.
So that meant on the publishing side, as a QA lead, if they didn't fix your bugs, then that might affect whether they got paid for their milestone. How do you think?
Well, it becomes when you're third party QA. When you're publisher QA, you're in a weird triangular relationship because you've got your own, you've got the third party developer out here, but you also have your own product development team on the publisher side, and then you've also got the marketing over here. And marketing is all about we bought ads on these deadlines. We need to be in store on this date, or it's curtains for the free world. And so you do a lot of horse trading. You do a lot of how crucial is this? Back then it was worse, right? Back then it was worse because sadly we live in the era and have lived for over 10 years now of the day one patch, right? Where you ship the thing and
You're doing that on CD-ROM.
you keep going. And at Mattel, we just had this mindset where we can't do that because moms and dads cannot be bothered with patches. Part of the Mattel brand name was that it works out of the box, right? And also the internet was more primitive back then. But I think you still, even with all internal teams, you still have this conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, with here's how it's going to affect the players. Well, how badly is it going to affect the players? Is it fixable? Can we triage this in the next thing? And so it kind of becomes, even if it seems lopsided, a negotiation. Would you agree?
So actually, I have experience with that because Retro has our internal QA team. There's Nintendo America's QA team. We even have Nintendo Japan's QA team on Prime 4. And all three of us have very different, and because the Retro QA team works with developers directly, we have different stake or priorities versus Nintendo of Japan or America have very Nintendo quality or like very consumer first mindset. So you're going to have, at least in Retro, it's dev focused versus consumer focused. There's always there's a bit of tension between like what is worth fixing in that regard.
I still have PTSD from Nintendo QA. Just saying. What were you going to ask?
For y'all that worked in AAA and then AA or indie, would you say that there's a difference in the QA and talking with developers with AA and all of that?
So Airship is, I consider AA for indie. And speaking with other people who work with indie studios, indie's very laissez-faire. Like it's either like super chill or kind of just fly by the seat of your pants. When you don't have a publisher to answer for, you would think that makes things easier, but then working as an indie, it's up to your standards, and those are going to be infinitely higher than a publisher because you're developing the project and you want it to do well. Versus at Retro, which is ostensibly a AAA, it is so incredibly regimented about my workday that, like when I worked at Airship, I knew everybody on the team, and it was a smaller team. I think 80 people in studio, 120 people-ish total, but I knew everybody, and I could freely walk around and just bug people if I needed, like, hey, I have a question about something. But at Retro, it's very much like QA team has their own little block, and we're just living in here because we just have so much work to do. And there's not a lot of interface between departments unless the interfacing between departments is like there's Slacker teams. Like, I'm not going to go over to the audio team or the design team. I'm just going to stay in my lane and just work through Slack, is my experience.
We got time for like a question.
Oh, well, I had like three. Oh no. I guess. Okay, what's the one that I really want to ask? I'm curious about the tools. Maybe I can talk to you about that because I'm curious. You mentioned Jira, but I'm curious if you're using a lot of proprietary tools internally, or if they're like still kind of commercially available tools that you're using that people could like start learning now if they want to get into that field. So I do have that question. But then my kind of heart question I have is like, do you find that QA mindset, you have to turn it off when you're at home playing your own games for enjoyment?
You can't turn it off. I'm so tired of breaking. Can I tell you? I'm just so tired of finding, of just breaking stuff that I'm trying to play. Right? I found bugs in Zelda.
Me too.
I don't want to. I do not want to find bugs in Zelda.
And you're like, I'm off the clock. I just want to play a game. I don't have to report.
I'm sorry, I jumped in.
So just curious. Either one of those questions, feel free to answer.
Or just keep going. Like we've successfully made words out of our mouths for the past hour, so we can like try to cut it at any point in time until you guys are like just done.
Yeah, we'll wind up.
Something that I would recommend for people if they want to start trying something is we use OBS Studios to record our gameplay, and then we use some little green icon to map our keyboard inputs. It's called no board. I think it's no board, and it's a little N and then a little B and some little green.
And it just tracks your keystrokes?
Yep,
Like
it just
log-
tracks your keystrokes.
Oh, it's a keylogger.
Yeah, it has it on top of the footage in OBS Studio.
Oh,
There's a way to rig it so that it shows up.
Oh, that's so cool.
And what makes OBS so great is that it was really tricky to learn when I first found it. So whereas there's a lot you can do with it. So if you can get work in and figure out how to do all the cool things, you can be able to control if it records your whole computer audio versus your game audio specifically, what footage it's recording. So you can layer up if you have to have multiple examples of footage, but you can only Jira is really finicky about how much footage and examples it allows to get uploaded sometimes. And so it's nice to be able to layer it a certain way and edit it. So that's a good tool.
Yeah, I think every other type of studio besides AAA, you're going to have your bog standard tools, especially engine wise. So if you're thinking about just learning how to make a game, if you're going to go an indie AA, or you're going to have Unity, Unreal, and all that. When you get into AAA or quadruple A, when studios have their own proprietary engines, that's its own other beast. Retro has a slew of proprietary tools, or even when you have the Frostbite engine, which is a proprietary engine, there's a bunch of you're not going to know until you just all right, welcome to DICE. Here's Frostbite. It's an FPS engine, but we made it an RPG engine. AAA, AA, you're going to have a lot of proprietary tools. And then, real quick, I've always just thought about this. About your question about turning your brain off. This is a thought experiment for everybody. If you have any game in your Steam library over 1,000 hours, raise your hands. Yeah, I know you do. The hardest thing I think about QA, I have 4 games that have over 1,000 hours, and so you need a different hobby, besides.
Thank you.
Because you will, I love video games, I still do, but when I cross my 1,200 hour mark in a game, I don't want to play video games anymore, and so picking up reading, cooking, literally anything else is really important for your mental health as a game dev. Any game dev, but I think especially QA, because you're literally playing the game for not 8-9 hours a day. So.
Yeah, I think when it comes to turning your brain off, the answer is no, you can't. And you'll notice bugs that you would never, ever have noticed before. When I play stuff with friends, for example, I'll be like, oh, do you see that? That thing's broken because I did this when that happened, and then that happened, so now that's broken. And I'll be like, man, I didn't even see that. What are you talking about? But I don't know. I think it's whatever. Some people hate that. I think it's just kind of funny a lot of the time. Even your most favorite game, it's oh, that's a broken asset. What the heck? When it comes to tools, I've only worked in AAA and I guess quadruple A. I don't know. I guess that's a thing now. And I would say in terms of tools, it's going to be different at every single place you work at. So I think you can actually get yourself into trouble if you try to focus really hard on learning some specific tool. It's better to be able to quickly pick up any tool that's thrown at you. I think the only tool I've used at all 3 of the companies I've worked at is Microsoft Paint. When I take a picture of the bug and then I put a big red box around the thing, and then I put text. I put text with red text with a white background that says, "This is broken." I'll be okay, the asset is missing, something like that. Microsoft Paint, sure, but and I've worked on different consoles, PlayStation dev kits have like built-in tools for like recording. Like we used OBS when I was a PC tester on XDefiant with like a special, not the thing you use, but like an OBS plugin that showed your keys. Like VR has its own whole thing, and like even with like, oh, you can say like, oh, like we use Jira like at all these companies or use Jenkins at all these companies, but like even like the individual Jiras are set up completely differently. Like I barely even recognized Jira when I started my current job because it looks so different from like what I'd seen at Activision and Ubisoft. So I would say being able to learn new tools quickly and like being flexible is going to be a really, really valuable skill.
Well, thank you so much for your kind attention, and please join me in thanking our panelists, James Nix, Lily Perkins, and Luke Pan.